try and get our PowerPoint on the screen here so you're able to follow along with us. All right, there we go. Okay, so Marilla and I are going to briefly introduce ourselves, and then we're going to turn it over to Patty, since she is our facilitator of honor today, I guess you could say. So my name is Chandi Ewert. I work at Elmhurst College. Actually, I'm going to be transitioning into a new role at another institution very soon. And so part of our goal as the Professional Foundations Committee in choosing this book was really to give a resource for people who are starting that first position, whether it be a first graduate position or a first full-time position, or people who are working directly with those individuals. I know when I move into my new role, I'm going to be supervising a graduate student for the first time. So for me, reading this was really about how am I going to serve as a strong supervisor for this person that I'm going to be working with and help them to become effective immediately, as well as be effective immediately myself. So that was some of my interest in the topic. And Murillo, I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Chandi. Hello, everyone. My name is Murillo Sorenso. I'm an area coordinator at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And I will be with Chandi behind the scenes, helping Patty along the way. And if you do have any questions, I'll be the one fielding them in and facilitating that. So welcome again.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Patty Griffin, and really glad to spend this next hour with you virtually. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I serve currently as the Director of Residence Education at the University of Michigan. I've been in the field about 20 years, so I've had a few different kinds of transitions. Some I've done well, some I've not done so well. So I was really thrilled when Chandi and Murillo asked if I would join you in talking about this today. I think one of the things we don't probably do as well as a profession is talk about what didn't go so well. So that's where we do our best learning sometimes. So just kind of thinking a little bit about, just give you some context of my experience before we move into our conversation. All of my professional experience really has been in the field of university housing. So that's my context. I was a hall director at a small school and then moved to a hall director position at a Big Ten school before I moved to the University of Michigan, where I started in university apartments as a live-out manager. And then I've served 2 interim roles here at Michigan. So I had some both external transitions, but also transitioning into a different role in the current institution. And those can be really different kinds of transitions. So I thought, depending on your interest today, we can certainly talk about some of that. So, so I thought it might be helpful to talk also a little bit about who's in our virtual room today. So it is different when we can't see each other face to face. So sometimes it's not quite as comfortable to talk when we don't know who we're talking to. So in a minute, I'd love to do sort of a roll call just to see who's in the room. And also would love to hear if there's something in particular that you'd really like to leave our conversation today with. It'd be helpful to know that. And if it's just general interest, that's okay too. That's great. So, so I wanted to start with, to give you a minute to think about that, sort of my reflections after reading the book. I enjoyed it. It was a kind of a fun read. It really gave me an opportunity to reflect on, what have my different transitions and movements across the profession felt like and looked like, and it really kind of took me back to some good memories and some places where I thought, oh, I hope we never do that again. But I think transitions generally are wonderful opportunities to build on our legacy that we've already created, but also it's a chance, I think, to renew ourselves. So you start in a new place. It's kind of a new slate to say, all right, how do I want to start here? What's different for me? And so that's kind of fun, I think. I think, so there's kind of 3 things in there that I was thinking about, the reflections that I took away in a general sense. And one is this whole idea of we create our own image for others. So this new start gives us a place to sort of create our own branding. The other thing I walk away from any book, and this is no different, is there's some nuggets in there that I really resonate with, and then there's some others that that didn't quite fit for me. And I don't know if that would be the same. I'd love to hear your reflections on that. But I think what's most important to think about with these transitions is to be intentional. So trying to figure out, what do you need in this? Because what we know is that we all are different in certain ways, and we need different things in our transition. So being intentional about what you need, and I think the thing I would end with for this section is be the driver of your own transition. You know best what you need, and then helping to figure out within your new environment, how do I go about facilitating that? And then who helps me, right? So who are the people that I can tap into, either who have been there a while or also are transitioning, but you're the driver of knowing what you most need. And then others can help you by filling in context and, you know, as you build relationships and get to know different perspectives. But so those were the things I first thought of after sort of my first pass on the book. So for whatever that's worth. So I wonder if we could just start and do a quick roll call, just maybe your name, where you're from, and if there's anything in particular that you really wanted to get out of today.
Excuse me for just a moment, Patty. This is Eric again. I want to just cover really quick again. We had a couple people join after the initial introduction, so just to go over kind of the instructions for how we're going to do the audio today, set us up for success. If you just joined us, what we are going to do in a moment is unmute your microphones from our end to allow you to speak, but we need your help to make sure that you are muting yourself when not speaking. So on your GoToWebinar control panel, please look for a microphone icon near the upper left-hand corner, and when that is green, that means that you are able to speak, and when that's gray, you are muted. So I'm going to actually deactivate the controls at my end that allow you to speak, and I just ask that you please keep your microphone muted when not speaking so that we can minimize distractions. As Patty calls your name, we would then ask that you press the button to unmute yourself. You may speak and share at that point, and then mute yourself when done. And the last thing is that it looks like many of you, I only see one person, Scott, looks like is dialed in on the telephone. The rest of you, it shows that you are connected using your built-in computer microphone and speakers. If that is not the case and you're actually dialed in on the telephone, you'll need to designate that on the GoToWebinar system. There's a section on the GoToWebinar control panel that says audio, and there's an option for mic and speakers or telephone. If you are in fact dialed in on the telephone, please go ahead and select telephone. That way it will know how to let you communicate with us. Otherwise it may not work correctly and we may not be able to allow you to speak. So if we do call on you and we for some reason can't hear you, that may be the reason, so we just ask that you check that. So at this point I'm going to turn it back over to Patty and she can begin the roll call.
Great. Thanks, Eric.
And if you could also add how long you've been in the field or what type of role you're in, that would be helpful for us in knowing how to guide the conversation today.
That's a great idea. Thanks, Chandi. So since we're listed alphabetically, maybe we'll just go down through the list and starting with Aaron. Okay. Aaron, can you hear us?
Aaron says
Aaron
I think I'm having
with
issues
his mic.
Yeah.
He says sorry.
Yeah, for those of you who are having
Aaron?
issues with your microphone, please please feel free to dial in on the phone. That's the best way to actually communicate with us. The computer audio can be somewhat unreliable. To do so, simply select telephone on the audio section of your GoToMeeting control panel. It will give you a telephone number and an access code that you simply dial into, and at that point we'll be able to communicate with you using audio that way. So if you are having those issues, I know we got a couple questions. Aaron and Jessica, if you want to give that a try, then we'd be happy to call on you that way.
Okay. So we can come back to Aaron then. How about Alexandria? Okay. Our audio may be giving us a few minutes. Courtney, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Ah, great. Hey, so maybe we can start with you, Courtney. How would that be?
That's great.
Great. So oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. That's fine.
I was just going to ask, so just your name, where you are now, what kind of role, how long, and if there's anything in particular that you're really looking for today.
Okay. My name is Courtney Marshall, and I am a residence hall director at the University of St. Francis in Fort Wayne. I go by Lovey, so that's what most people would know me as. I really, really enjoyed the book, and I'm looking forward to taking the next steps into being an area coordinator and kind of what that looks like, and kind of what Chandi said, how you work with how you work with RDs that are also entry level, kind of like being their supervisor. So that's kind of what I'm interested in.
Great. Thanks, Lovey.
Thank you.
Sure. Jessica, is your audio working for you?
I think so.
Oh, great.
Okay, yay. My name is Jessica Woods. I'm currently an area coordinator at the University of Southern Indiana for just a couple more days, and then I will be transitioning to Western Illinois as a complex director there. I've been in this field for 3 years full-time. One of the things that I'm looking forward to is hearing and talking about how we can take this and work with graduate students, kind of like Chandi was talking about earlier.
Fantastic. Thank you. So, Kaylin?
Yep, I'm here.
Fantastic.
Well, my name is Kaylin Nolan. I am transitioning actually into Northern Illinois University as a residence hall director. I actually just finished up my grad assistantship at South Dakota State University, so entering a new region. And really I'm just interested in general knowledge about the book and what everybody took from it and everything of that nature.
Fantastic. Thank you. So, Scott, how are you doing? Okay, maybe we don't have our audio working there yet. Siobhan?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay, great. I am a area coordinator at Lewis University that's outside of Chicago, and I've been there for 2 years, going on 3 in the fall. And I guess what I'm hoping to get out of is how to best support my staff. I do supervise 3 graduate assistants, and that's just one area that I know that I still need to develop better, is how to support the staff that I supervise. And so I think that I've definitely got some good tips from this book, and I'm hoping to hear what others have to share about supervising.
Fantastic. Thanks, Scott. So, Siobhan. Okay, we'll try to come back. Aaron, are you able to hear us?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I'm really sorry about that. I was like scrambling behind the scenes trying to make sure my things were working, and then it just wasn't working out. But hi, everyone. My name is Aaron Hill. I'm at Northern Illinois University. I'm in my first year as a residence hall director, and on the 16th of next month, I will have finished up my first year. And what I'm looking for from this discussion is kind of twofold. A lot of discussion has been already brought up about grad supervision, and I will be having a first-year grad next year, and so I'm very interested in learning about how to help him or her transition in. But then also for myself, just kind of defining and continuing to define what professionalism means. And I think this book was very helpful and had some really good insight, but I'd like to continue that discussion and kind of figure that out some more for myself.
Fantastic. Thanks, Aaron. And then I think the only audio we were struggling with still, Siobhan, are you able to hear us?
Hi there, Eric here jumping in. Siobhan, try clicking the microphone icon.
Yes, go ahead.
Try clicking the microphone icon near the top left corner of your control panel, and that should unmute you. Try now.
Hello?
There you go. We got it.
Okay, great.
Hey.
Hi. Good morning. This is Siobhan Nolan. I am currently a residence life coordinator at Elmhurst College. I've been in the field going on 5 years now. And I'm in a few more days about to be transitioning into another institution. And I think for me reading this book, I kind of picked up on just learning to take initiative when those opportunities might not be available to you, finding that initiative in some other aspect of the position to continue to grow as a professional, and also to, offer yourself as a resource to your students as well.
Fantastic. Thanks. And
Thank
Alexandria. Oh, I'm sorry. Alexandria, did we hear from you? Eric, any thoughts on the audio there?
Alexandria, right now we are not hearing anything. It looks like the system shows you on a computer microphone and speakers, but that may not be working correctly. So if you'd like to consider dialing in on the telephone, simply click the telephone option on the GoToWebinar screen. It'll give you a phone number and an access code, and you can communicate with us that way if you'd like to give that a try. I'll go ahead and send a note over to Chandi and Murillo if I do see you get connected by telephone, and they can ask Patty to try again at a later time.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So I have a confession for you all. So as we work on the technology side, 4 minutes before we were to organize this morning, my internet didn't work and couldn't get the system to work. So it's new for me too, and so we just learn that as we go along. So no worries. So let me try to make an attempt at pulling out some of the themes that Chandi and Murillo and I really found sort of compelling in the book. And you've already touched on some of this in our comments, and then we'll get into our discussion of sort of drill down to where you'd like to go a little deeper. So some of the key points that you've already talked about, which is fantastic. One is taking the first steps. So, oops, let me drive the PowerPoint here a little bit. So this notion of taking the initiative, like Siobhan just talked about, finding opportunities, I think it's important to be able to see yourself in the role. So it might be actually a sort of a departure to, I'm leaving my old world, whatever that was, and thinking about this new role and seeing myself in it. You talked a little bit about professionalism. Aaron talked about what does professionalism mean. It's important to be seen in the leadership role that you are. So I thought they talked about that in some really great ways. And the third bullet there, being patient with yourself, I think is just critical. I think we can sometimes self-induce stress around transitions that already have some anxiety in them, right? But give yourself some time. You don't have to know it all at once. So I think really trying to figure out what do I really need to know, and focus on that, and the rest of it will come. And you've all done some transition into the role that you're in now, so kind of thinking about that. So it kind of moves on to the onboarding plan, which I think is probably a really critical area. So it's the first place to think about, all right, what does this transition mean to me, right? So clearly learning what are the expectations, what is my role, and where does it fit in, whether it's, if you're a visual person, looking at an organizational chart that helps you place yourself for context, not to box yourself in, but get some context of what's this all about. It's identifying what you need to know in the first few weeks. I think a mistake that I've made in the past is the pressure I put on myself to learn the entire organization and the vision and how we're going to live it. What I really needed to know is, where do I work? Where do I park? what are the immediate needs in this role? What do people need from me? And then what do I need to kind of get myself grounded? And so give yourself time to really figure out where you start, right? The relationships with others is key. That's one of the things they talked about, and I certainly resonated with, is finding the few individuals that I can kind of partner with to help me figure out how I step into the new role, how I step into the new organization. That could actually be peers who are also in a similar role at that institution. It might be my supervisor for some. It might be other colleagues, And one of the things that I think they talked about was getting multiple perspectives on, those relationships that will help you, and folks that you feel like you can ask the questions that no one wants to ask in the large group, right? So, what am I supposed to wear to this meeting? Like, what's the culture? So the last bullet there is learn the spoken and the unspoken culture. I think that's both difficult sometimes, and it's critical to our success. So finding folks that you feel safe with, that you can say, all right, or for those of us thinking as supervisors, how do we help folks? How do you take away the mystique of our organization? Because when you're in it, you don't feel like there's much mystique. But when you're trying to enter it, it can really feel a little daunting sometimes. Like, all right, is there a dress code? Is it okay to be more casual? And if so, where and when? Timeliness. The University of Michigan has something called Michigan time, which means that you come 10 minutes later. So if the meeting starts at 10, it doesn't really start till 10:10. It makes me crazy, but it's the culture here. So I just have to live with it, and I have to understand that's how it works here. So I use those first 10 minutes to socialize with folks who do also come early, like me, and understand and make room for folks who say the culture here is that we start 10 after the hour, so I just go with the flow. So it's a little hard for me sometimes, but understanding the culture is really important, and getting it from different viewpoints. So I think those were a couple of areas that I thought that the book really talked nicely about. Internal and external transitions. Some of you have talked about you either have just transitioned or coming upon an anniversary soon, congratulations, or moving to another role, which is fantastic. But what are the relationships and the peer groups and the expectations, and are they different? I think sometimes having done both external transitions, being new in a completely new environment, as well as then being in the same institution, in the same department, but moving to a different leadership role, expectations are different. There will be folks that will question, well, why did you get promoted and not me? So there's a shift in relationship sometimes. Sometimes there's a supervisory shift in the relationship. So how do we navigate the change in relationships? And how do you best represent yourself? And it goes to when Erin says, what does it really mean to be professional? It's a great question, and I think hopefully we can move into the discussion in a minute here and really talk about what's that mean to us, and what's it look like? What does success look like as a professional? And I think the other piece that I would talk about is managing change. So I think it's really, I think, part of our fabric as institutions that we're all about change pretty much all the time. We're paying attention to what the needs of students and staff are, and we're adapting. And so learning to be adaptable and nimble is important. Trying to understand what the change is. What I would offer, and what they talked a little bit about, is, how are you seen as part of the change? So, which means understanding it. So I think one of the things that we maybe want to talk about is there will be changes that we'll be responsible for implementing that we won't agree with. So how do you become a part of that? How do you learn from the organization how has change been introduced in the past, and what went well and what didn't go so well, so we don't repeat those mistakes? And then how do you position yourself to be helpful both to those who report to you, to peers, but also think about the concept of managing up. How are you helpful in change to those that you report to? And so I think that's one of the things that, as you think about how you position yourself in the professionalism, that's a pretty important one to pay attention to. So, and then just a couple other points that we wanted to touch on. Recognizing the impact of generational characteristics, that we are working with folks from different generations. So I think it goes back to relationships, really getting to know who people are, share who you are. Your identity matters. So if I'm an African-American woman moving into a predominantly white department, my identity and everyone else's matters in how we build those relationships and understand our characteristics. So that's a really important one. They talked about generational, but I would broaden it to identity. The second bullet there, see potential in unlikely places. This is a great one. It's like, very often we look at what is the work that I do? And when they use the term grunt work, sometimes doing work on the ground really gives you a perspective of how the larger organization works, but it also helps build a reputation and a relationship that says, I'm willing to step in and help. So think about that. So using your downtime effectively, I think really gets to balance and gets to, how do you integrate yourself, and then how do you use your downtime to help you be your best you, right? And your Gene Kelly steps, which I love, what are your Gene Kelly steps? How do you navigate? I think it's fantastic. So, and then learning to deal with difficult situations. I think there's part of every culture, there are politics and dynamics. There will be gossip or dynamics around an in-group and an out-group. How do you navigate that in a way to not feed into negativity, but be a positive part of the dynamics? And we'll have conflict, and it may or may not have to do with the first bullet, but there will be differences of opinion, different approaches, different perspectives. And so how do you learn how to navigate that with each other in a helpful way? And then the difficult situations they talked about around, personal crises and work-life balance. I think one thing I have learned is we're a whole person, and our work is a part of who we are, but it's not, we don't compartmentalize, my personal life and my work life. They touch each other. So it might be interesting to talk about that a little bit. So those were just some of the themes that Murillo and Chandi and I kind of pulled out of things that jumped out at us, but maybe we could just kind of move into the discussion. So I wonder if it would be helpful to talk about, are there particular things that stuck out from the book or from these pieces that we summarized that you'd most like to talk about? Is there something there to start with? And if not, we can move into something else. So let me open it up and ask if there's anything that was most compelling that you'd like to talk more about.
And before we move on, there was a few questions about Twitter, if this conversation can carry on to Twitter. So a quick search on hashtag ACUHO, I see that Kaylin has created a hashtag for us. It's hashtag ACUHO Book 2013. So if you like to use Twitter to share your comments in there, you can also always use hashtag ACUHO. And Patty, we had a question to see if you have a Twitter handle that you can be then referenced on the Twitter conversations. Do you have one?
Oh, I sure do. It's GriffPat, G-R-I-F-F-P-A-T.
Great. All right. So we can move on to the discussion now. Thank you.
Great. So anything that folks want to start out with?
I can start.
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
One of the interesting things that I read about was dealing with conflict, both with colleagues, but then one thing that I started thinking about was dealing with conflict with student staff that you're working with, or with a grad student that they have a conflict with you and you working around it as like a mentor aspect or trying to work with them in that aspect. So maybe discussing a little bit about that.
Sure. Can you say that one more time? My audio was phasing in and out.
Sure. Mine was with working with conflict and dealing with conflict with your colleagues, but then also with student staff or with graduate students that you are supervising, and trying to work with them to deal with the mentor role, or have them understand your role in that conflict, as the book was kind of talking about a little bit.
That's great. That's great. Does anybody have an initial thought on that?
This is Chandi from Elmhurst. I can't really speak from the role of somebody supervising a graduate student yet. Give me a few months. But I can speak from the role of being a graduate student and having a couple of different supervisors during that experience. And one thing I really appreciate about one of my supervisors was when I came in at the beginning of the year, I had actually had some previous full-time residence life experience before going to graduate school. So we had a conversation about, and he actually told me, I feel like I have as much to learn from you as you have to learn from me. And I want this to be a cooperative relationship. And that's maybe not everybody's style. It was his style, but it was something that I really appreciated. And I felt like, and he was always still the supervisor, but I felt like it leveled the playing field a little bit more. And so as a result, I was, very open and willing to admit when I made mistakes, and he did the same, and we could have conversations about that. And so I think seeing in a supervisor that willingness to talk about when you contributed to conflict and call yourself out on that makes it, it kind of exemplifies that for a supervisee. And so in the times that I did make a mistake, he would just be able to, start half a sentence like, oh, so this time when whatever, and, I would fill in the rest of the sentence like, yeah, I know that happened, and, this is what was meant by it, and so there was just that mutual sense of respect that was created from that conversation at the beginning of the year that made those very few times when conflict did come up a lot easier to handle, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, well, that's helpful.
And I think, this is Siobhan, also from Elmhurst. I think for me, I've had the opportunity to supervise a few graduate students in the past, and just to tackle on what Chandi said, like being more transparent with your, the people that you supervise, letting them know that you make mistakes and that you're open to correcting these things, and just creating that open relationship from the get-go. I think for me, when I was supervising a graduate student, I was new to the position, and the graduate student had been there for quite some time as an undergraduate and then as a graduate student. And so, again, like Chandi said, just willing to say, hey, I'm going to learn something from you just as much as you're going to learn something from me. I had been out in the corporate world working before I came into residence life, and so I was bringing that standpoint. But I did have to learn in the res life world to be a little more warm and fuzzy. and so I had to develop that, and I feel like one of my graduate students really helped me to learn that kind of culture about the warm and fuzzies, and then I grew and I found out that I love the warm and fuzzies. So and when it came down to if there was ever a conflict or a situation between us, I felt like it was much more acceptable to have a conversation about it versus avoiding it and, having some of those things where, my supervisee is going to talk to one of my colleagues or my supervisor or that kind of thing. It was more so like, hey, Siobhan, I'm having an issue with, this particular supervisee because my graduate students also supervise students as well. So I think it just opened up more and more dialogue if from the beginning you let them know that you're human and you make mistakes as well.
That's a good point. I think it makes me think a little bit about my best supervisory experience. What I knew is that my supervisor has my back. And so even when I make mistakes, he could talk to me about I wouldn't have handled it that way, which was the nicest thing he could have said to me. But he really helped me to ask some very specific questions. And so when I'm feeling tension, I don't even know if I'd call it conflict, but when I'm feeling tension with a coworker or another person that I work with, the first question he always asks me is, what's really going on with this? Is it really about what you think it is, or is it something else? And he would challenge me to not climb the ladder of inference, but to really try to get to sit down and talk about, I'm experiencing this differently than you are. So can we talk about this and get an understanding of what was really going on, and as opposed to taking sides or positioning, but trying to support both people in the conflict or the tension. And it's always helpful to me to take a step back and ask, what do I think is really going on here? Not how am I reacting emotionally, but what's really going on? And then try to unpack it from there. That just shifted the conversation, and it got more to us both understanding both sides. So I don't know if that's what you were meaning when you first raised the question about the conflict, but those are some things that came to mind for me.
No, that was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah. I'd love to hear how people are, so many of you talked about supervising grads or moving to a role where you're going to be supervising other folks. This notion of how do we create a culture, or how do we help new folks learn the culture as they come into a place? I wonder if folks could talk a little bit about, what you've experienced has been really great, or the things that would have been helpful to you.
This is Chandi. I once had an experience with a supervisor who I think in attempts to be very helpful and help me learn the political culture quickly, the supervisor was very honest about all of the maybe the things that weren't so positive about the department or weren't as effective, whether that be with processes or with the way certain individuals did their work in their jobs. And on one hand, that did help me learn very quickly. It helped me to avoid some mistakes. It helped me to approach some people in the correct way. And it helped me to know what to expect in a lot of ways. But in some other ways, it kind of created this, I guess, jaded is the best word I can think of, kind of feeling that I took on even before the year even started, because I kind of picked up on those feelings from my supervisor. And as a result, maybe it had kind of a detrimental effect. So I'd be interested in hearing how people balance that with new supervisees or maybe new coworkers who come in and you're trying to get them used to the political culture, but at the same time, and you want them to know what to expect, but at the same time, you don't want them to, and you want them to be excited about the position and not focus on the negative, because every place is going to have challenges. So I'd be interested in hearing how people do that most effectively.
Yeah. I could say here at Michigan, one of the things that I experience and am trying to get better at doing is saying to folks before they come in, here's who we're trying to be. And I talk about the core values of the organization, and we've tried to create a document that says, here's how we're trying to demonstrate it behaviorally of who we're trying to be. And I both talk about it at the interview process, but then when they first come in, actually not when they first come in, I try to let them get in and work with their direct supervisors and all. But at some point in the first month or so, I try to meet with every new staff member. And one of the things I try to talk to them about is not everybody experiences this the same way. And so trust your gut. So you've got a way of working and a way of making sense of things. Not everyone loves every core value of our department. I'd love it if it worked that way, but that's probably not as likely. But we're hoping that folks come to whatever role you're coming to say, I know what this department is about, and I buy into those core values. And how do we help them navigate that? So I think we have to be authentic. I have to say, not everybody agrees with everything that we're doing. But here's the why behind what we're trying to do. I don't know if you've watched the Simon Sinek TED Talk on the why, or if you've seen his book, but it's a 20-minute TED Talk that's really fantastic. He talks about focus on the why behind our work, not so much the what and the how. But if we can all come to a baseline agreement that the why behind it, we're in agreement, then everything else can kind of come from that. But I think it is being authentic to say, here's what we're trying to do. Not everybody is on board, or they're in different places of feeling comfortable with how we're doing things. So you'll need to find your place. So I don't know if that makes sense, or if it touches, Chandi, on what you were talking about.
Yeah, it does. Does anybody else have experience with that, or thoughts on it, or maybe thoughts on how it's been successful for them, or other people have helped them to make successful transitions in that way?
I think for me, the only time I've ever been in that position where somebody new was coming in was when I was in my second year of graduate school. And I think what helped me with bringing the new grads in and making sure that I wasn't painting a picture that was perhaps too negative was I really tried to spend a lot of time during the summer between my first year and second year really trying to figure out, like, what are the things that I'm really frustrated with, and how much is it personal baggage, and how much is it that really I could blame on something else. And what I found was a lot of the stuff that I viewed as negative and was very frustrated with in my graduate experience had much more to do with me. And so during my second year, when I would get questions from the first year grads about, oh, well, what is this like? Or I hear that this sucks, or I hear that this class is awful. I had to really challenge myself to just say, well, I had my own experience, but I don't really want to shape yours. So I'll gladly process with you how you're feeling about it, but my experience is my experience, and it's going to be different. And that's kind of just what I stuck to, which helped because then I didn't have to feel like I fed into the negativity or being maybe brutally honest to the extent that it shaped their experience and painted a very negative picture like what it sounds like you had experienced.
Yeah. And I would say that really has a lot of integrity and a lot of honesty. You're being candid to say, there's some things I struggle with, but I'm working on them. So I don't want to color your perceptions, but how can I help you in other ways? I think that's great. I think that's, yeah. There is something there, too, about, like, how do you, starting a new job can be overwhelming. You're trying to figure out a lot of things. So I've heard a couple of you say some things that sort of talk about how do we make this smaller? Like, really, how do you help them focus on what's first, what's second? This other stuff will come. Don't worry about it right now. But sometimes I think for me as a new person, I have so appreciated somebody suggesting a way to step into it, as opposed to, you got to figure it all out right now, and it's just overwhelming. So thinking about, how might you parcel it even? Here's some things you just got to know right up front, and you've got to, you got to get this stuff first. But then this other larger philosophical stuff, maybe some of that can wait till later, some can't. So thinking about what the framing is. So. For those who are just about to transition or who have recently transitioned, one of the things that I saw in the book is a lot of being, I guess the notion around being self-directed. So to what extent do you create your own, chart your own course, I guess, if you would. What do you need in transition? And then how do you ask for help to get that? Like, how do you get what you need? But could anybody talk about, what you're thinking about? For those, a lot of you are either working with grads now or about to. Questions about how you might start with them?
This is Chandi. I think in a lot of situations, at least when I was a graduate student or starting out as one, I didn't even know what was out there, what was available. So I think for those who were willing to pass on, whatever opportunities were out there to me or explain those things, that was appreciated. Because I think things that seem intuitive to me even now, I sometimes forget that not everybody knows what NASPA is. Okay, I mean, that's pretty basic. But even smaller things or other opportunities that I hear about all the time or people just talk about or involved in or I'm involved in not everybody knows about those things. So, so remembering that and keeping that in mind, and so when I meet my new graduate students that I'm going to be working with, figuring out what their passions are and how I can educate myself about those, even if those particular things might not be my passions, and figure out how I can help them with that would be a goal, but something I'm hoping to be able to do.
Yep, definitely. You know, we've done a lot of talk about, you know, when you look at supervision, and it really is not so much that you have a supervisory style, but you're getting to know each person and what they need, and supervise to the person, right? So in a way that they can be most successful, which is really what we're trying to get at. But, so a couple things that just to make a quick shift, because I'm cognizant of our time together too, thinking about sort of how do we help people get centered when they move into a new place. And so thinking about networking. So this slide doesn't say it all, but trying to think about how do we help folks be in contact with others who will potentially become their networks, or help people think about in a new place, how do I create my network? So a lot of times it just, our work group ends up being the starting place, right? So the folks that you're working with every day become sort of your networking group. But maybe helping folks think about how will I create a network of relationships that will help me be successful. So you've got friends and relatives that have a place in your life that can help you with perspective and context or balance, right? Institutional colleagues, which could be within your department or outside. So thinking about how to help them connect and get networked in the areas of their interests or their passions. Or folks that may be around identity. So at Michigan, although we try to work very hard in our diversity, for our staff of color, they're still in a minority. And so helping to connect staff of color across our Division of Student Affairs, across the institution, thinking about what helps somebody feel welcome and included and having a support network. And so thinking about those kinds of things. So peers and external colleagues. But just through this slide in there, just to help us think about that. There's some things that that help us with our networking. And we'll share this PowerPoint with you on the ACUHO website after today, so that to whatever extent this is helpful, you're welcome to have it. Folks have, I know we've got just a few minutes left, but anything around networking that jumped out at you through the book or in your life?
I think something that I'm always wondering is about that first point. Oh, this is Chandi again, sorry.
Yep.
It's about helping other people and not asking them to help you. Particularly in my position as an entry-level professional, when I'm connecting with people who have been in the field a really long time, and I want to learn from those connections, but I often feel like, what do I really have to offer you, especially if I don't work at your institution, or what do I really have to offer you? And so sometimes I struggle with that because I don't want people to feel like that I'm networking or engaging in conversations just to benefit me, because certainly that's not the case, but I really don't feel like I have much to offer somebody who's been in the field, 15 or 20 years longer than me, who maybe I've never interacted with before. So what are other people's experiences with that, or how do you navigate that, or what do you do? Seems like everybody's just as stuck as I am, maybe.
Yeah. One of the things I would say is that as a person who's been both at Michigan for a long time and in the field for a while, I really rely on folks coming in and sharing their experience and their perspective. So the older I get, the farther away from the student experience I get. And it worries me in my role of how do I make sure that I'm making good decisions that support students and support our younger staff. And so I'm trying to listen a lot. So maybe the way this was worded in terms of helping other people, but definitely I think sharing how are you experiencing our institution, or how are you reacting, or what are your thoughts around a particular initiative. I think it's a mistake for those of us who have been in a place longer to think that we've got it all, because we don't. You experience it as a newer staff member to the organization. You'll experience it differently, and it's a really important experience to understand. And how do we create a culture of support if we don't understand that? So I think it's a great question, Chandi. I don't have a good answer for it, but I definitely resonate with it.
I think this is Siobhan, I mean, I don't know if this is the answer to Chandi's question, but just a thought to think about. I think just sharing what you're involved in and what you're doing, and I know from working with Chandi, you're really good at that, and I know that's helped me moving to this area. I'm from the southern region, so I'm from the ACUHO region, and when I was working down south, ACUHO was just kind of thrown on your plate. Like, you knew you had to be a part of it, at least at my institution where I worked. And where I currently work is kind of like one of those things where if you want to be involved, you can. It's not, you're not obligated to do so. And so me just talking to colleagues here, just asking, well, what are you involved in and what else can I get involved in, I think that has helped me to, that alone has helped others, has had others help me to learn more about what they're doing and what I should be doing to kind of further myself in this field. Because right now I love Res Life so much, and I know one day I'll probably have to leave. But for right now, I want to, make my footprint last. Make a lasting impression with my footprint in this area and in this field. So I think just sharing what you're involved in, you might not think that's valuable, but I know for me personally that is, especially someone who's new to this region.
Yep, that's fantastic. And I think we have opportunities to role model. So when opportunities come up for regional conferences or presentations on your own campus, inviting a staff member to co-present and creating that partnership, I think, is another way to model it. But I think you're right. I think it makes, how do we be accessible and supportive? So, and I think on larger campuses, we often make the mistake of thinking someone else is attending to the transition. And so maybe even just checking in with new staff along the way of, what's making sense and how does this feel, and, what's missing? What makes no sense to you about our organization? Because surely there are things. And, so I think the more we can attend to how, the onboarding isn't a week long, as we all know. So, creating some, maybe it's calendaring to check in with different people at different points, just to be attentive, and to notice. So, let's see. I think there are a couple other slides, and we'll send this to you. But some of the things that there were some other resources as well, talking about, how do you establish yourself? And this first 90 days, some of you may have read, but it definitely talks about, promoting yourself, and you're balancing learning and doing as a new person coming into a different role, and then attending to others who are coming in, how to help them with really getting established, because our goal is to help each other be successful. That's our only goal. Our departments have other goals that are bigger, but when we think about transition, we want you to be happy and to feel productive and to find your way and find your fit, and so the sooner we can help you feel successful in that, the better we can do. Okay, so there's probably some things we didn't talk about, probably a lot of things we didn't talk about, but I think we're at time.
Transition, Patty. I think we had one more slide.
Oh, yes.
So I just want to put in a little plug for the first 90 days. If you're not familiar with that book, it's definitely a read that we would all recommend, especially if you're moving to mid or senior level. So Effective Immediately was kind of an introductory, first position, first graduate position, or thinking about that, reflecting on that. The first 90 days is really highly relevant, I think, at all levels. So if you want to continue challenging yourself after this, I think that book gets much more in-depth and might have some things that are more immediately applicable to whatever role you're moving into if that happens to be a higher level. So check that out. And Patty, I'll let you talk about the change book. That's not something.
Sure. This probably doesn't really relate to transition as much, but I threw it in here only because I've been flipping through it for the last 6 months, and it's one of those that you can flip to any page in the book, and there's different nuggets, and it's divided that way. But it really talks about sort of taking the anxiety out of change and trying to figure out what are the different ways that you can manage change, because the truth is we all have to lead change. And it can be overwhelming and it can be daunting, and trying to figure out what my role is. And what I'm learning is while I might not be leading certain sets of change, I can influence making it easier for people and making sure that we're making changes that make sense for those that we are responsible for. So it's just kind of a fun book. I think it's worth checking out. So I just wanted to toss it out there as a food for thought.
And then finally, I think that due to some of our tech issues in the beginning, we barely got into talking about some of the concrete points in the book, whether you agreed or disagreed. So I'd love to continue this discussion on Twitter and the Professional Foundation's blog. I just tweeted the question that Erin had posted us in the beginning, is what does professionalism mean, and how do you define that? How do you reflect on that? How do you help other people learn that? What if your supervisee's definition of professionalism is different from yours, and how do you, is one right or one wrong? And kind of thinking about that in the context of some of the recommendations that were made in the book and whether they might apply to residence life or not. So if you're on Twitter, I would encourage you to use that ACUHO book hashtag and continue some of that discussion, or comment on the blog, let us know your thoughts. And thank you all for being part of this today and our quick and brief discussion. We hope you got something out of it.
And I'd also be happy to connect with anybody anytime. I'd love to talk more. So great. So Eric, I think I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, everybody, and I appreciate your patience with our technology issues. I would invite you to participate in future upcoming roundtables. I'm sure that you may be interested in some of those other ones. So if you do, you'll be a pro by then because you've been through one of them. So thanks again, everybody, and great job on our presenters and facilitators today. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, all.